Hey, train your plants every day. George Scope coming at you from the STEM lab. I'm not gonna put on my glasses right now. I'm just. Anyways, so hopefully if you've actually used some of my YouTube or my Facebook pages and things like that, and then I really like those setups. You would see that a lot of that of what I've set up right now is specifically, remember specifically, special relativity. Is in this case my general's command directive for how to build a frame state that will help you within the shortest number of moves possible, at least. That's a mathematical statement. That's an algorithm between 0 and 1. One move. Start to be able to analyze or be able to form a cohesive model of a thing, the composition of whatever you may be dealing with in terms of how to process it. Now remember, just to jump in the mathematics of it, that's psychology and physics, and hopefully if you watch those videos that I set up on my Facebook page, again in a retort to that other visual or video system, you'll see that they really do speak the same language. Again, this person's point of view or this person's view, or how I'm going to specify without a bias to either one of them, how they're exactly the same thing, how I view them, and how I use this general time that I have to help you specify. Don't take the time to separate them. Use them simultaneously, because what you have when you do simultaneously link them is like highly energizing a particle or a wave to create a given state out of it. Again, it's a quantum mechanics statement. When you shrink it all down, when you freeze the molecular movement of these two particles, it can change the state of matter, right? So what you're going to get is a form. And I like to describe mathematics as not only the zero dimension of how we talk about it here. Obviously, there's 3 dimensions, there's 2 dimensions, and however you want to talk about that in the quantum nature of the world of whoever's dealing with what today, zero it out, because they're all going to zero out into subparts anyways. Or the 1-2 dimension, how I can take that thought in whatever field it is, and with given points, break that down. And then mathematically, 0 and 1, scales and vectors, if you will, or the nature of 2 dimensions. It's written on a flat piece of paper. Write out these command directives or be able to word them out. 0, 1, 2 dimensions, and how those complex computations. I might have to put on a quantum mechanics one if I'm not mistaken, but I'll put it on after a lot of this. Alright, just because I want to show you, hey look, this is the analyzation, this is the nature of that matter, how these things behave, how the environment and I act in this environment. This is the same thing as a lot of chemical reactions that are based into physics about the way they behave in this specific case. After that cake is baked, I can still use physics to recreate them, to make them work backwards, but it's still in a direct physics sense. So if you do watch some of those videos, some of these analyses are going to come off to be very prevalent and understand what you're dealing with. So again, always come to me as a general. Write me a question, leave a comment, like my video if you like it. Just throwing it out there. Because I am trying to recruit a little bit into my own cult following and to what have you. I'm American by the standard, which means I'm a part of every given group that's out there. I'm still going to have to use physics and psychology and mathematics to form out the group and the equation, the given state of how that's going to be processed beyond those things of a differential or what have you, of whatever that's going to look like. And again, as somebody who understands some basic mathematics here, basic, not basic, ground floor stuff, that's where I cut it off. Bang. It's a very pure aspect, but again, we zero this out. It doesn't really mean anything. So is it always that traditional base? Not necessarily, but it will allow me to gravitate to something. We go back into not to use any given equation, but the base of understanding. Let's change out the symbols. Let's take these 2 parts and turn them into this thing. A differential is to say point A and point B have a means, or I forget what it was, how it was worded in the behavior of a thing, talking about that the means. This is that mean average between those things. Well, that's a differential when you understand that through psychology and physics, but now that becomes a symbol. That becomes an aspect of how we've taken that nature, instead of saying, well, here's all the complex mathematics for it, that's real geometric. This is the real integer. I'm a real integer. The situation is real integer. It has given specific geometry that is too heavy duty in terms of what you're going to see in some of those videos about quantum computers. It's not necessarily that our classical brains can't handle that. It's just that it gets really divergent, and there's so much overwhelming volume that you have to individually process one at a time that firstly are generalized. We have to, it will infinitely travel into all those things, and it's easy for the brain to just, but the computer is programmed to only do what this thing does. And some of the great things about generals and things like that out there is there's a great, I think I said it in one of my videos before, is like, that thing that they do is they can do that very, very well. And it's something we all have. And no matter what conversation you have or whatever you're talking about, you're doing that. Sometimes the matter that you're computating isn't quite as visual to the irrational number as being so important to other people. I have a quote up there, you know, sometimes it takes a touch of madness, was one of those ones with those Illuminati quotes or anonymous quotes or whatever it was, or to the idea, what was the other one on there? The smarter you are, sometimes, you know, to the dumber people in the room, but you can be the smartest person in the room. If you can't gauge that, how much smarter you are, there's always a comfortable medium between that. And I think the other one has a little bit to do with it as well. That's why I chose it on my Facebook page there. But when you process like that, there really is no positive or negative. But it'll come off in a conversation where all those checks and balances were hit, at least with a given ratio of a perspective number, which goes into that quantum nature of a thing completely filing down into infinite systems and behaviors, which a quantum computer doesn't. When I understand, here's as a governor or as a general, there's the battlefield. If I start getting into quantum mechanics, it doesn't sound right. One of the things I like to say, again, if I didn't say it in my other videos, I disagree with a lot of the things that Patton did or Freudian. You gotta look at this. You know, Patton may have won the war, but was it always through the right means? If you understand quantum mechanics, education, and these other fields, this might have been a more positive aspect to describe how to win this war through directives and documentation, democracy, and other values containing the bullet and the barrel in the same regards. Is it always what's necessary, though? I'll bring it up in the conversation. Well, certainly in this string theory of events between this wave function that can reciprocate abruptly between ax and by and this next parallel, or ax and by, and that quantum nature of a thing, to this air turbulence equation and all those other happies that you'll get into, which become really relative. It's just how I start this, so we'll build that in my introduction so you guys can have something to talk about. And when you guys bring it up, well, what I was talking about here is ax and by. And I'll be like, yeah, I agree with that, and here's another state of it, which you can hopefully agree with me as well, because that's how this stuff really works. We're just dealing with special relativity. This is the geometry. These are the given integers. Me, you, in this conversation, being the new environment, the geometry of how we're dealing with it as the generals, the given particles of this given system, between x, y, and z, between 0, 1, and 2, between 1, 2, and 3, a, b, and c, and any other variable mathematically by symbols that could mean that one thing to reduce the time and space necessary so we don't overcomputate that equation, if that helps. All right. And if I didn't say it before in those other videos, I absolutely want to. There's no substituting experience. There's no substituting a good vocabulary. It's going to be absolutely necessary even through my class. It's something I've learned. It's something that I find to be very useful as a tool to help. But there are many equations out there that you could reduce this down to, and you could say, well, obviously that's a better equation. Not always. Sometimes you need it in that form. My example for this is in my garden, my grow log, is I used to use CFLs. I'd start my system in December, and I would just run my mother plant like that. Well, by using those CFLs, I was calculating the negative velocities and negative accelerations to have a positive effect. That if I use Pro Dog lights with the best spectrums and the highest ratings that ever possibly go in terms of whatever human nature can, you just always want the positive, the highest heavy duty standards. Well, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you can just take your little video editing app for what you can do on your cell phone and have the same exact effect with the result that you're talking about, instead of using some really ridiculous editing software, things like that. Hell, I don't even edit my videos anymore. It's just I have to get apt with this process. Any 15-minute conversation, sometimes the nature of reducing some of that aspect there would be cutting out time. There's still a quantum nature between all those events that really happens to have the same result at the end line. Geodesics, give you an equation I'm going to throw out into this conversation just so I don't waste time, and give you another example of another form to use that equation with its geometry in a real given integer, which geodesics is a, b, no zeros, no 1, no real number, no y's, no x's, no z's, but we generalize it in special relativity. Like that, I always thought that was cool. In a lot of ways, that's what I do with my equations and my processes. And just for me, not that you couldn't get into biology, chemistry, but more specifically, I find really realistically that it's physics and psychology. In my physics book, we're going to build with the first introduction being mathematics, and a lot of forms that might come in. And we're going to parallel that in special relativity with a lot of physical examples. As a teacher, you have to be able to take a 1 plus 1 equation, and you have to take it into apples, gravity, people, quantum gravity, or whatever variable psychologically that might be relative at a given time in general. It'll help you process those numbers more importantly than just being sitting there at that wall. How do I name this starting back over from square one? That's going to be the nature of what this is, and it's a very hard thing to describe. And I say it with psychology and things like that. Well, a lot of this time it's just how do I convince you that I'm the general and you have to follow my orders? Well, in the military, this is a pretty easy conversation. Like, they come here because, like, there's forms, there's education, there's food, there's, housing, and all that stuff's there. And a person, how do I get you to get to that point without there? I usually give a general flourish. Math is a fist fight. If I can survive that more than 5 minutes with you or take it to the ground faster than you, I'm probably going to be alright. And tap you out, make you get thinking that way about me. And I'm boldly honest about it. It's just my technique that will help you understand this. A lot of times I'll give you information that's going to hurt you. It's going to be like, well, why should I listen to you then? I could do any of that stuff because I'm really good at the micromanaging of those features, the really fine details of taking your direct physics and applying it to you in a psychological way of how you're evaluating your home life, how you're thinking about why you're going out to the bar or banging everything that moves, or why you have anger issues and all those other things, because at the end of the day, they're just physical forms. They're physical forces. They're apples and gravity and time dilations and negative times and positive accelerations and positive velocities. And I'm going to be really good about explaining that to you there, to not just give you a specific number, that integer that really doesn't exist, but yet an integer in a form that works to your calculations, all those particles and those wave functions, that's going to rely to a better number that you understand. So the goal for me is to kind of divide these into two subjects, and not to truly divide them, but to show, at any given point on these aspects, I could make the quantum connection. And sometimes you're really going to need to do that. But if you don't understand them, if you don't have a good fundamental base, or somewhere where that locks in like gravity, how would they ever know that you're skilled with those things? How do they know that you can't change those things at will? Like, you would expect a general or a G over this conversation to really be able to do, like being a G of the universe. Catch you on the next one.